What is up, CNFers? It's been far too long, but I hope you've had a chance to catch up on some of the past episodes of this cool CNFing podcast. Coming at you from the bowels of the hashtag CNF podcast recording studio, which is to say, the closet in our bedroom. It's humble, to put it mildly. Anyway, so what's pinned to the hashtag CNF corkboard? Well, I've been posting cool quotes on Instagram, Brendan O'Mara, for those interested. This quote, though I haven't posted on Instagram yet because it's a bit too long, comes from the great actor Bryan Cranston, who you may remember played Walter White on Breaking Bad, among many other things. But I think this quote is really cool because it pertains to not just acting, but really the creative life, and also just anyone who does creative work, whether that be writing, acting, or whatever. I think the principles are what's important. So here it is. In order to have a successful career in this biz, the entertainment business, whether you're writing, directing, acting, or producing, or whatever the case may be, there are components that are necessary for that to come about. One is talent. You really do have to have talent. You have to work hard and get educated and learn your craft and learn your business. Aside from that is personal development, patience, and perseverance. But there's also a component that is necessary. That's the wild card, and that's luck. You have to have a healthy dose of luck to become successful. That's just the way it is. You can't prepare for it, but you can be ready for it when it does come to you. So I really dig that quote. But in any case, you know who has all of that in spades? Maybe minus the luck because she really doesn't believe in it. Well, let's cue the music. It's episode 18, featuring Mary Pilon, the New York Times best-selling author of The Monopolists, a gripping tale about the ubiquitous board game Monopoly, and freelancer extraordinaire. She has been named to one of those 30 best journalists under 30, so you know she's legit. While I've got your attention, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, share it with friends, share it on Facebook, and retweet it on Twitter. Also, be sure to sign up for my newsletter over at my website, brendanomara.com. I'm changing up the format and probably going to a monthly newsletter instead of the RSS one. I toyed with a weekly one for 2 weeks, but that was too high maintenance. I have big plans, but it all starts with getting people subscribed to the newsletter and the podcast. This, my friends, is my collection plate. So, without further ado, enjoy this conversation with Mary Pilon. Thanks very much for being patient and carving out some time from your schedule to come on the podcast. It's really it's awesome to talk to you.
Anyone who's had Glenn Stout is clearly has good taste. So.
Well, yeah, he's generous with his time too, and loves talking shop, which is really the point of the podcast is to promote people's work I admire and to dive into the processes, work habits, routines, and just kind of like get to know the person who does the good work. And you fit the credentials in spades.
Cool. Well, thank you so much.
Well, you're welcome. And and sometimes I ask some just like really random questions too that sometimes don't have anything to do with narrative journalism. First one being, and I always like to ask something that's a little off the beaten path, and I want to know, what is your stance on Batman as a superhero?
Oh, Batman as a superhero. This is like one of the biggest debates.
Yeah, we got a big movie coming up, so I need to know where you stand on this.
And he's not my favorite. I'll put that out there right. You could do. He's just not my favorite superhero. Period. Never has been, never will be. That doesn't mean I don't like the movies. That doesn't mean I don't like the comics. But he's never been. You know how it is. Like certain superheroes, you're just like totally gravitated towards, and certain ones you're not. And so he's never been the magnet for me. But I actually think you could do a whole doctoral thesis on like Bruce Wayne and class, like, and then kind of. And because, this idea, I mean, the big knock, right, the classic one is like he's just rich, right? But also, I used to, when I was at the Wall Street Journal, at one point, And I was covering mostly Wall Street, and at one point I was specifically covering wealth management, which is how like the ultra rich deal with their money, and which is hilarious because that's something that's so far from my own personal experience. And one of the things you learn is that for all of the issues that come with that, there is also a huge power to philanthropy and investing. And so this idea that like rich people just don't offer anything to society, I think is like a little dismissive. So I have like a little bit more nuanced view of the critique of Batman. But that said, I was just never, especially because Superman has that whole journalism backstory with Clark Kent. Like, so, there's like the step away view, and then there's my personal view. And so I do think the critique of Batman could be a little bit more nuanced, whether I agree with it or not. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And so do you, who would be your superhero of choice?
Well, I grew up like mostly Superman, and then Wonder Woman too. Although now I have a kind of more complicated view of Wonder Woman. Mm-hmm. But we also grew up reading a lot of Fantastic Four. I remember those being like a really, a really resonant theme. But one of the jokes in my family is that when my brother and I would read Superman comics, I would like skip to the Clark Kent Lois Lane passages. So I like, which was maybe an early sign that I was into journalism. Like I thought all the new, like exciting stuff was happening in the newsroom. And I've been like, over the last few years, really rethinking Lois Lane. And like, if you actually read the Superman, there's actually a collection, I have it somewhere in my apartment, of the Just Daily Planet stuff of Superman, and you read it, and it's such a product of its times, and he's just like mansplaining to Lois Lane now, and I'm like, oh god, like this is so like not like we need to rewrite this whole arc to make it more contemporary. And nobody's ever like talking to Superman about his inferiority complex, and like I think that's what's so fun about certain things you read as a kid is you can reread them as an adult in a totally different way. And it doesn't make them more or less valuable, but so I'm having a lot of grappling with Superman because that's kind of my default answer, which I know is lame, but it's a complicated one.
Well, it sounds like you've given this a lot of thought.
I know, right? This is what you think about on the treadmill, or at least me. I'm like, oh, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, where do I stand?
Very nice. So, all right, so you're at a dinner party, and someone asks you what you do. What is your answer to that question?
Oh, what a good question. And actually in the last year, it's changed quite a bit. The short answer is journalist author. The longer one is story person. Because, classically, for years, it used to be very simple. I was like, I'm a staff reporter at the Journal or the Times. And then the Monopoly stuff was kind of this nutty side project. And until a book comes out, you're just like the Looney Tune writing about board games. So it's not, I've been that crazy person at dinner parties for a long time. But now that I'm kind of freelancing and all over the place, and I find myself, kind of journalism, for lack of a better term, in the kind of newspaper magazine sense, is still kind of my bread and butter. But I find myself, more interested in kind of different ways that we're telling stories now. So that could be screenwriting, that could be game design, that could be podcasting, that could be... So I think the core of what I love to do is story. That's like what gets me up every morning and excited. So I hesitate a little to just say like journalist or author because it seems limiting,
Yeah, that's. I was thinking how I would answer that question too, and I wouldn't consider myself a reporter per se, though I do some reporting, and but I totally lean more on story. Like story is what drives me to the page, drives me to read and everything. So I think you saying story person is really like a great way of saying it. And you can't say when you're saying, if you wrote fiction, you could always say, oh, I'm a novelist or a short story writer. But in nonfiction, you can't really say, well, I'm like a narrative journalist or a creative nonfictionist. So it's kind of a weird place to put a title. But story person, I think, is the best thing you can say in a lot of ways.
Right, and what's so funny, I think that's an important distinction you're making between fiction and nonfiction, is that with the exception of some screenwriting, almost all that I do is true storytelling. And I think that, everybody's different in journalism, but for me, the reporting is the fun part, like the learning, the traveling, the interviewing. The writing is when I lock myself in my apartment and I feel like a hermit and I'm bearded and I don't know what I'm doing. And I that's, and some people it's the opposite, right? And so the reason I think I love the reporting is it's kind of a boondoggle of a gig, right? Like you get paid to learn about stuff, which seems nuts. And I just get so riveted by real people and their stories. And I know that sounds cheesy, but I've always, I one time took a fiction seminar in college, and I got so excited because I was like, oh, I'm going to sit down and write this fictitious short story, and look at me, I'm just like Hemingway, blah, blah, blah. And then I read the story, and it was just like, it was pseudo memoir. It wasn't fiction at all. I was like, oh God, I can't even like, who are these people who have these whole universes in their head, like, oh. So I don't know. I mean, I have deep admiration. I'm a voracious reader of fiction, but I don't know if it's something I could do, at least at this point. But
yeah, I'm the same way. I read a ton of fiction, mainly so I can say, all right, how can I pull off what they're doing in fiction and from a pure mechanical way, but make sure that it's all verifiably true, because I just find that more interesting in a lot of ways. I guess I just don't have the imagination to do what they do. So if I just do a ton of reporting and then tell it in a way that reads like fiction, that satisfies. Like I get my Joneses off in that kind of way. And it sounds like you're kind of similar in that sense.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that with Monopoly, I read a lot of books about screenwriting actually, because I felt like, and I still feel this way, that the longer you're writing as a journalist, it's a huge ask of someone's time, and that's something I get really paranoid about. Is, am I wasting someone's time? That's like one of my middle of the night fears. And screenwriters, that's a structure game, and there's something about movies. Capote always talked about the immediacy of film, that they really do really, really well in terms of grabbing your attention. And game design is really good about this too, because it's psychology. It's making you turn around the corner. It's making you click on the next thing. And I think that those are all things that journalists can rip off. There's no reason people need to feel like they're being fed vitamins when they're, there's different kinds, right? Like there's like a daily story, like at the Times, which is like a very kind of classic, here's your information, you want it quick, you want it easily. But then when you get to the narrative stuff, yes, you're trying to teach somebody about something, but you're also trying to there is an entertainment component to it. And that's something that I think years ago I wouldn't have even thought of. And now I think more and more people, especially now that the way people are reading is changing in terms of devices and iPads and such, that's something that people are thinking more about because they kind of have to. There is this idea of well, if people are really going to spend time with you, how you do compete with Candy Crush now as a journalist. If you do compete with, God only knows what other things are people's phones these days. And I actually think that can be a good thing in the end. But we'll see.
It really helps you drill down on your word economy, and also when you finish a chapter or a set piece, it's like you always have to have in the back of your mind the stakes of the reader, and that, okay, have you earned the right for them to go to chapter 2? Because they can just turn you off. So it's like you almost you have to have that engine in mind and that sense of narrative pacing, because especially if they're reading on an electronic device, they are one tap away from their email or Twitter or anything. So it's like you really need to have a real sense of information, but also give them the reason to keep going.
Right. And I don't know about you, but I feel like now I read more than I ever have in my life. I mean, between Instapaper and the New Yorker, both the print delivery at my home and the iPad app and the phone app, I feel like, and I'm just less angry when I'm stuck in line now because I have all this stuff in my hand, to entertain me or inform me. So, yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I don't know where things are going, but I'm very excited actually about the different things that we can do now as storytellers. And actually with book number 2, and I'm in the very, very early stages. I haven't even really sat down and started writing the darn thing, but it's exciting to think about things visually ahead of time and be like, oh, how could we use photos? How could we use video? How could we integrate that in a way that I couldn't have even dreamed of, even 5 years ago when I was starting to write The Monopolist. So, and it's interesting because I think that there's people who are very resistant to that, and there are parts of that I resist, but then there's the exciting part of it. So I think a lot of journalists now, you kind of have to wear the inventor hat maybe in a way that you didn't used to.
Yeah, which goes to your point of being more of a story person instead of reporter or journalist. It's like, how are you going to use your unique talents, the nature of your talent to convey the story you want to tell, and you're just embracing the new mediums that are out there. Because, when TV came along, they said that was going to kill radio, and then and so forth. So everything evolves, but nothing truly dies. And what really survives is someone with a unique set of talents like yourself that can convey a good story. And people are always hungry for story, and the people who have that in their bones will always sort of rise to the top, I think.
Oh, well, thanks. And I mean, it sounds really cheesy, but I just grew up in a house where, we had bedtime stories. Like, we talked, whether that was, watching I Love Lucy with my dad and understanding why the jokes were funny, to my mother was a psychologist, so she didn't talk about her clients personally, but kind of a big part of psychology is understanding someone's story. Where does this come from, whether that's schizophrenia or what have you, or, And it's funny you mentioned, I realized I haven't really talked to anybody. So the book came out in paperback last week, and
cool.
I finally got to come clean about this thing. I wrote something for Medium about so endnotes for me are this amazing map in nonfiction, and some authors use them, some don't. And I feel like Robert Caro is like the Michael Jordan of endnotes. Like, and if you're a researcher, they're huge because you need to know where people got things. And if you're a journalist, it's an amazing way to kind of shut down critics and be really transparent about where you're getting sourcing. And it's something you can't really do in newspapers as much. I mean, you can use hyperlinks sometimes, but anyway, so I had this moment where I was freaking out about my endnotes when I was closing the book, and I decided to hide a puzzle in it. So I wrote something to the effect of hey, if you're actually reading this, if you're actually a human being out there in the universe, email me an anagram at this address or whatever. And then we ship the book and move on with my life, and I kind of just sit and wait. So the book comes out February of last year to non-critics, I guess, because you send galleys out, and I kind of sat and I was just waiting. I was like, who is reading? Who's actually reading this thing? And not only reading this thing, but maybe the most boring or overlooked part, this is page 200 or whatever. And sure enough, a few days in, this really nice doctor in San Diego emails me an anagram and was like, oh, I loved your book. And then I started getting more and more people, and I was so humbled by that. I was wow, people who aren't my relatives are really getting into the weeds with this thing. And those are just the people who email you. So you have to assume that, some people read it and don't, email, which is totally fine. So yeah, I was really I felt very warm and fuzzy about that, because I think that so much of writing, and Margaret Atwood has talked about this, that especially with books, historically you are off on your own and you don't know who's reading it or what the impact has been. And I do think that one of the things that I've loved about both newspaper work online and also the book is that you really hear from these people, and your readers become these human beings that I think in generations past you just had to kind of fantasize about, and they're here and they're emailing you and they're calling you, and I find that part really exciting.
Well, it goes the other way too, that if you respond to them, they all of a sudden are reminded that, oh wait, it's not a robot writing the story, it's an actual person. And that tends, if they come at you in a aggressive way, and then you kind of email them and placate them, be like, oh, I'm sorry, it just came off the wrong way. It's like you are reminding them that you're a person too.
Well, yeah, and I'd even take it a step further, which is that they're your customers. They're your customers, And yeah. I remember at the Times of the Journal, you really get kind of the gamut of reader email, and this is still the case. And that's everything from people calling you just horrible things to little kids doing book reports to little old ladies. Everybody, your fourth grade teacher, whatever it may be. And I loved writing back to them. And it's really time consuming. It's kind of one of those things. It's you wake up early, make a pot of coffee, and you kind of charge through. And some weeks I'm quicker at it than others. But I really, really loved that, because I remember as a kid, you would send fan letters out to an ether or something. And a colleague of mine from the Journal, Jason Zweig, wrote this great blog post about finding a letter he'd written to Norman Mailer when he was a kid. And I don't know. I just think that that's important. I think one of the things that the internet has done a great job of, in a pretty bad ways, it's dehumanized people. And I think that's why you have trolls and commenter culture and stuff. And I think the more you can kind of remind people exactly what you're talking about, that especially creative work is from a human being. And I think that's going to be the stuff that lasts. And I think that's the power, that's the good side of it. And things like support groups and networking, and the thing that the internet does really well, which is bring people together. And I know it sounds warm and fuzzy and woo-woo, but I do think that there is a book component of that. And you see some authors really, gravitating towards that. And I think that that's fabulous. And I think there could be more of that.
So you grew up in Oregon, right?
Yes.
So what was that like growing up in Oregon, and like what did you said your mother was a psychiatrist or a psychologist, and what did your father do?
So funny. So my dad had a variety of jobs, but kind of when I think of what he did most, he worked in radio as a DJ. So I grew up in a house with a lot of records and, learning more about how to make a mixtape than take the SATs. Yeah. And, Oregon, it's a funny place, and my family's roots go pretty far back there. And I grew up in Eugene, which is about 2 hours out of Portland. So it's kind of it's a funky little place, because it's, in the Willamette Valley, so that's like Portland, Eugene, kind of the cities. By the way, there's only 3 million people in the whole state. I mean, it's
wow.
Not talking about a metropolis. In Eugene, I think it's about 150,000. So therefore, kind of everybody knows everybody. It's pretty easy to have connections. But it's cold and dark and rainy, and I think this is common. Like the stuff that you think is normal as a kid growing up, you don't realize is weird until you leave. And I always joke with my brother about this because, like, we grew up playing a lot of games, like video games, board games, puzzles, and I read all the time. And I don't know, I mean, if I'd grown up in, like, Southern California, maybe I'd be more athletic, but not as into books. And so I do think that, that I wonder about weather and reading. Like, that's a chart I'd love to make sometime, because I'm just convinced that because I grew up in a cold, rainy place, I became, like, an indoor recess kid. And I went to public school there, and then I was one of those kids that just always, from a young age, wanted to move to New York, and I wanted to travel, and I would look at an atlas, and then I did. So I left when I was 18 for college, and I still have a lot of family and friends there, and I joke with friends, because people say, like, how can you live in New York and have it be sane? And I'm like, well, I've never lived in New York and not had like a Pacific Northwest escape hatch every 3 to 6 months, where that, I'm kind of like sent back to the woods. Mm-hmm. So I do have kind of this strange hybrid life now, where other than living abroad in the U.S., the only 2 places I've lived are like woodsy Oregon and New York City. And I know there's a whole bunch in between, but I'm like, well, if there's not horses and cows, and if there's not like a subway, like I don't know what to do. Like, so yeah, it's fun. It's a great spot.
Yeah, I have a romantic idea about Oregon, probably the same way you had a romantic idea one time about New York, and going there. Just the idea of the lifestyle and the geography of the place, I find just immeasurably appealing, and I can't wait to head out in that direction at some point. But it seems awesome. Yeah,
it's funny. I have a kind of a running joke with my friends that Brooklyn and Oregon are becoming the same place, which is to say that there's like both have like exposed brick and people wearing plaid and like the
beards,
like microbrews. And so I used to like that plane ride used to be like this big dramatic thing, and now I'm like, I don't know, like people in New York are really fetishizing the Northwest, and people in the Northwest are, people here now there's like Stumptown coffee like everywhere, and I'm like, what? Like everything's just blobbing into this one hipster subculture. Like, oh man.
So, like, growing up in Oregon, clearly, like, the state mascot is, like, Steve Prefontaine. And, like, you wrote a great piece for Grantland about Pre. And I was wondering, like, what impression, and you do some, and you're a runner, too, like, not a track runner, but I believe you run long distances.
Yes.
And so forth. So I imagine that that Pre had some sort of an influence on you growing up, and then you wrote about him, obviously. So I was wondering what his impact was on your life growing up in his backyard.
What an interesting question. So both my parents were at the University of Oregon, and my aunts and uncles all kind of like in that era. So I think if you grew up in Oregon today, yes, you still hear about Pre, but I had this extra layer of having, and my dad's the oldest of 4, so it's like quite a few, like it was just talked about a lot. And strangely, I didn't actually personally get into running until after I left Oregon. I think it's one of those things you grow up there with, and I was very allergic to sports as a kid, ironically. I was way more into music and theater and going to punk shows, and like, because Eugene is like a very sports-centric culture, and I was like too busy pretending to be rebellious, although I was pretty bad at that too. I liked school so much. It So, and now, and I'm very much in the Murakami school of like running and writing to me are very related, and they're very thick, and they're very, and so the backstory on that one is it's bizarre. So I had grown up for years, like any kid in Eugene, hearing, Steve Prefontaine, he just got, hammered at a party and crashed his car. What an idiot. He's kind of like the James Dean of town, and he's told as this like cautionary drunk driving tale. And then I went back in 2012 to cover the track trials for, the Olympic track trials for the Times. And I was catching up with somebody, and I was at a diner, and somebody who I'd gone to high school with just mentioned in passing, blah, blah, blah. Well, I heard he wasn't actually drunk that night. And then it turns out that she tipped me off to somebody who had been there that night. And that was in 2012, and I just couldn't, I was like, what? It was just so counter to everything that I had heard, and I just had never looked into it. And I think back then, I think it was in 2012, I got the police report, just kind of on my own. I was like, I just want to know more about this. And it was before Serial, but I remember when Serial came out, just thinking like, oh my God, I feel Sarah Koenig's pain so much. Like the idea of what's real and what's not, and things happened so long ago, and you feel like you don't have context. And so I kind of over years was like chipping away at it. And then when I left my contract at the Times, and for the first time in my entire career could write for anybody anywhere, and I'd been reading Grantland for years, they reached out to me and they were like, do you have anything you want to do? And Grantland, I mean, rest in peace, but those stories I would argue are very specific. They're kind of like these offbeat, sports stories that, again, they're longer, which is so a treat when you're a writer. So you have to have something you can really sink your teeth into. And I knew that my book tour was going to end. I knew I was going to be looping through Seattle and Portland and then making a pit stop in Eugene. And I thought, what cooler way to take a week between, running around, yammering about the book to really delve in and take a week and just do this. And Grantland, I mean, one of the things that made it so cool to write there, and that was the only piece I've done for them, is I was reporting the story, and I felt it was so funny. I was like, wow, I went from book tour to being small town reporter of my hometown, and tracking down these people in the police report, and so many of them, and they're all the characters in the story now, they were still there, nobody really leaves Oregon. And it was the anniversary of Spoon River Anthology coming out, which has always been one of my favorite things in the world. I don't know if you've read it, but it's, Edgar Lee Masters, and it's this collection of poems in a town, and each one is a different character. So the Undertaker poem is one I've sent a lot of people. I mean, it's just, so as I was reporting, I emailed my editor at Grantland, and I was like, hey, I know this sounds crazy, but can I do Spoon River Anthology, but with runners? And because all these, it's a story about people who haven't let go. It's a story about people who are left behind when someone dies, and whether he died in a drunk driving accident or whether he died in a more nefarious way or whatever, at the end of the day, it's never going to make sense, because the loss of someone that young is never going to make sense. It's just so awful. So they let me do it. And that's kind of how we ended up with the story, in these kind of lots of tiny sections, which I actually, now that you're, to bring it full circle to web reading, think that that's how people read, but you kind of trick them into reading, 5,000 words or whatever that is. But I love history, and I love the idea of being able to take something from the past and kind of exhume it in a way that is, and particularly his sister and a lot of the people who knew him personally, I was so taken with how they still were carrying this. I mean, he was somebody who they were very close to. And, so I did have kind of a home court advantage in that I understood Eugene and what a weird place it is and what its relationship with running is, and Nike and how it's changed the state of Oregon. So, yeah, that was it's one of my favorite things I got to work on last year, because it just felt so hearty and so, kind of satiated a lot of my curiosity about someone who I'd thought of for years, but didn't really, it's so different when you start talking to people who knew the guy,
Yeah, and I feel like that story, it with a couple of the things you've done, fit into this sort of, this, what I'll call a genre of the ubiquitous token. So let's just is this notion, almost generic, which will tie into the Monopolists for sure. You wrote the story for SB Nation in November about the Jumbotron. Everyone just knows the Jumbotron. And then the Monopolists, everyone just thinks they know Monopoly. And then you go and tell this whole intricate woven narrative about these things that have just become sort of these generic icons. And I was wondering, like, what about that, or what is the draw for you when you see these things to unearth, like, really just this trove of information that everyone has just taken for granted?
I've never had anybody put it that way. That was really clarifying, because usually people are like, what the hell do you write about? I'm like, I don't know, things I find interesting. Sometimes it's sports business, but like, I think that's like thanks for clarifying my career. But like the idea of like backstory. And I think that, and I'm actually working on a project now with a friend of mine where we have all these things around us. And I read about this a little bit at the end of Monopolists, like that just are around us, and we just accept that they're there. We don't think about backstory. We don't think about where they come from, and that, to go back to what we were talking about earlier, that it is usually a human effort. And I mean, every journalist has his or her graveyard of stories, and trust me, I have mine too. Like, there are things I've wondered about their origins, and you're like, oh, it just, it's just this. Like, it's really not that interesting. It's not worth however many words. And the Jumbotron story, to be honest, I just always was curious about. And I mean, I kind of looked at it from the back, like, meaning that, how weird that we go to live events now and still watch screens. So I was like, how did we get here? And I knew that there was going to be either kind of an abstract media angle to it, in terms of the evolution of our consumption. I didn't know how much I would actually be able to get. Like, finding the guy at Sony was such a blessing, because I was like, oh God, he's like a real human being who was really there, who could really piece this together, and he was so great. And so sometimes you can find those links, those characters that kind of weave it all together. And sometimes, and this is what happened with Monopolies, like Lizzie McGee wasn't alive and she wasn't able to tell her story. And I think that the public service side of my brain, if you're especially, like, I remember writing about like banking and money, you're always kind of looking out for the people who aren't necessarily represented by publicists and aren't necessarily, and history has a lot of those. So I think that it's the curiosity and the treasure hunt aspect of it that really gets me to geek out. And the other thing that is so funny about history is I think that a lot of journalists, you get trained to doing kind of beat reporting, where you pick up the phone and you call somebody, and yeah, that's a great way to report. But like, I love libraries. I love history stuff. And I can't tell you how often I'll really get into the weeds on the backstory of something, and it'll end up as a sentence in a story, if that. But I just feel like I can't write about today unless I really go into the rabbit hole of what came before. And some people aren't that way, but I am. And some of that's context and knowing kind of what questions to ask people and things. So yeah, it's funny, but honestly, it's more just me becoming mildly obsessive about weird stuff.
Yeah.
And you can make a career out of it. Look at that. So
yeah, I think I haven't read Dead Wake yet, but Eric Larson, who wrote about the Lusitania, there's another thing we just accept as this American ocean liner that went down during World War I. And then he has, he wrote a 400, 500 page book about some narrative that was somehow intertwined with it that you had no idea existed. And I wonder, like, along those lines, because you have done similar work, especially with the Monopolists, like, what some of your models were for that, and some of the things that helped build your foundation and your confidence that you could tackle a similar genre.
I'm a huge Eric Larson fan, and I think that you nailed it. And I think that he's so good at recreating suspense. And I think with historical work, it's really easy because we have inherently the benefit of hindsight. And he's so good at showing you how things unfolded in real time to these people. Like, that's why I think Devil in White City is so riveting, is that you could just start with the last page of that book, and that's how most people, think of it, like World's Fair. But he really does a good job of unpeeling that. So he's definitely on that list. And Garden of Beasts is also just one of my favorites.
Yeah.
Gay Talese, right? I mean, I think that anybody who's working in long form reads his stuff with the same kind of sense of it's a true story, and he really holds you for a long time, and he really weaves it. The New Yorker through the years. So I have a lot of those collections of profiles, and what's great about those is that I love the New Yorker's style of writing, but I also love how many reporters have kind of come and gone through there and kind of put their own twist on it. So I read a lot of that. And Hellhound on His Trail by Hampton Sides, which is a book about the hunt for MLK's assassin. I think is another great example of something that takes something. I think that a lot of what we're dancing around too is this idea of surprise, which is huge in storytelling. And I think that that book takes something that you think you knew, and it starts the movie where a lot of people end. And I think Larson's good at this too, is picking a window that you know is inherently important in terms of history and the narrative and the record, but really walking you through it and showing you the surprising element of it. I love Robert Caro. I think The Power Broker is just a majestic book, and it's so good. I mean, I know that sounds stupid, but I just he's so rigorous in his research, but he's also so disciplined, which I know sounds crazy because it's such a long book, but he's so disciplined about the narrative arc and keeping it on the rails. And, you know, with his LBJ work, it's that same idea of, you know, you could write everything you know about LBJ, or you could write about LBJ and power and really zoom in on that. And I think that he's so effective. And then Doris Kearns Goodwin is another one I read a lot. So Team of Rivals, No Ordinary Time. I think she's so good at, I mean, I read those like they're like trashy beach novels. They're so well written and like, but she's also really good at, you know, taking something like Lincoln, which, you know, Lord knows there's plenty of people writing about, and reframing it in a way and putting her own kind of spin on it. So those are kind of with Monopoly in particular, kind of the spirit animals I called on a lot. But yeah, I think there's more and more people kind of fusing these novelistic techniques into history, and that's a win for everybody because they're so great to read, and it makes history more engaging for folks.
So at what point did you approach the Monopolists as something that you found was going to lend itself to a book-length narrative? Like, how did you come to that story?
So I never was one of those writers who wanted to do books. I was really happy at newspaper. Yeah, absolutely. I loved newsrooms. I really thrived off of the work of daily beat reporting. I was not someone who had that on kind of her bucket list at all. And so in 2009, I was working at the Wall Street Journal, and the big story at the time, obviously, was the economy, and it was really depressing, but also really fascinating. And I was going to mention in passing, because I know I mentioned Oregon, you know, and cold and rain and loving games, that Monopoly was invented during the Great Depression, because I just, like anybody, that was kind of the story I had been told, and I was going to throw it in a story. And the Journal, you know, God bless them, like, every sentence in that paper has to be bulletproof, and you know an editor is going to ask you, and it has to be really, really, I mean, accuracy is just such a big part of the job. It is the job. And so I was looking around, it just wasn't making any sense. It wasn't adding up. Like, I know this may be hard to believe, but the internet had contradictory information. It was missing some.
Imagine that.
And so I reached out on a whim to Ralph Ansbach, because I had heard he'd been involved in litigation with Parker Brothers. And I felt like, well, you know, and this is like a common reporting trick. Usually lawyers involved in suing or being sued by something, they'll know stuff, because if you're going to be sued or sue someone, you're going to be doing a lot of research. So I kind of reached out to him on a whim, and I was like, you know, hey, I know this sounds crazy, but I'm a reporter at the Journal, and I'm just trying to find out the truth about Monopoly. And he really quickly got back to me and was like, oh, I know all about it. Like, it was invented by a woman in 1904. You know, started telling me all this stuff, and you still are super cynical, because you do have people calling you all the time who claim to be Deep Throat, and you're like, you know, and often they're not. But you take all that seriously, because everybody, you know, you just never know. And so once he started talking to me and piecing this together, and I kind of kept researching it, I remember going to the public library here in New York on the weekend trying to figure it out. And yeah, and if anything, he was understating how crazy it all was. Because I remember
it tore apart his life. I mean, talk about a full body, full life investment that really tore him apart. But yeah, like, definitely keep going. I'm surprised, like, he had that kind of energy to talk about it after what it did to him.
Oh my gosh. And he was so helpful. Like, he was like, oh, you know, here are the books you need, here are the documents you like. Wow. And so I did the story for the Journal that ran on the front page, but it was short. It was like maybe 1,000 words or something. And it was the first time, I mean, usually when you close a story, like, you're sick of it, you never want to think of it, you're like, oh God, I'm so glad it's over, because you put so much work into it. And this was the first time where I closed the story and I left, and I was like, there's more to this, I have more questions, I don't know anything about this woman, I don't know anything about, like, the early players of the game, and So I went to bed and I thought, well, we'll just see how the story does. Maybe it's just me. And the next morning, like the story had just blown up. Like it got all this attention. I had, my inbox was exploding. And so from there, I kind of started putting together the book proposal. And even then I was like, it was a longer magazine piece. Like, I don't even know, but I just know there's more to this. So, yeah, I think it was a year before I had the book proposal ready to go and kind of figuring out, and honestly, and this is how book number 2 came about, when the reporting just becomes really unwieldy and it just kind of outgrows the space of a magazine piece, which, like I said, has only really happened to me twice now. That's kind of like the bat signal. And that's why I get a little nervous and queasy when people come up to me and they're like, I want to write a book. And I'm like, well, like, your story needs to fit that format. It's not, you shouldn't just do a book because you want somebody to sit on your shelf. Like, it has to need to be a book. And Cheryl Strayed has this really great quote, and I'm paraphrasing, but about this idea that, like, your first book has a birth date, you just don't know what it is yet. Mm-hmm. And I think there's so much truth to that you can't force doing a book for the sake of doing a book. It's not this, like, thing where you're sitting at your desk that's covered in rose petals and it just effortlessly comes out. It's more like warfare. So
yeah, like, I think it's incumbent upon the writer to write the shortest possible work possible. So
exactly.
Yeah, and that could be a book. In this case, like, whatever, the Monopolists probably ended up being, I don't know, 80, 90,000 words. I don't know, 100,000 maybe in that ballpark. Yeah, but that was that's how long the story needed to be in that format. And initially it was 1,000 words. But like when you saw, like you were getting like business validation a lot of ways. All those emails were, as you were saying earlier, potential customers. You're like, wow, there's a market here that people want to really read about this. And you found that there was just so much volume to fill that, but that it merited that kind of volume, so to speak. So like I think you went about it the right way, and you're telling people the right thing. I think people they put books on this pedestal, but really it's, like, take a step at a time. Like, I think Hemingway never wrote a novel without at least making sure it was good as a short story, and then he took it longer.
Right. Yeah, and that's that's a really important point, because the other thing, and it took 5 years to do the book, and in that time, you naturally have people who come up to you who are like, I'm working on a book too. And you always want to be really positive. I feel like all authors, we kind of have a duty to support each other because we're all kind of in this, like, trench together. Yeah. But then you, like, in the back of your head, you're like, let's see it. And like so many people will be like, quote unquote, working on a book, and it's about putting in the time, right? And putting in the time to write it and report it and loving that process. And what's so fun about doing a second book is, I feel like my first book, I was a nervous wreck for most of it. I was really anxious about doing it. I didn't know how the book industry worked. I didn't know, like, I was so nervous. And this, this project is so, so different, but it's so much more going into a process and being like, I want to have fun with this. Like, I want this to be like to just take my stress and set it aside for a bit and really focus on the work rather than my anxiety about the work has been so great. And so, like, I think everybody benefits from that, and just like less insanity in the whole thing. So yeah, and it's so funny because the book thing, like, it really does get romanticized, and I think there is this idea that now, when you were talking about kind of digital journalism, I think one of the great ironies of the internet era, for lack of a better term, is that there's so much writing out there, and from a democracy perspective, like, I think it's fabulous that anybody can write. Mm-hmm. But the funny thing that's happening now is that I think people now value good writing more because there's so much bad writing out there. And somebody asked me recently, are you threatened by self-publishing? And I'm like, no, absolutely not. If there's like 10,000 self-published books and one of them becomes the next J.K. Rowling, that's awesome, because gatekeepers have done a pretty good job of shoving out a lot of voices, be they women or minorities, whatever. Like, so I'm anti-gatekeepers in like the truest sense, but I also think if you're somebody who's putting in that time on the front end and really thinking about what you're putting out there, that readers really value that now, and that there's a really that now more than ever, some of the best stuff can kind of rise to the top, and it can come from places that are maybe more unconventional and different than they would have been 50, 100 years ago.
The water is getting deeper, but talent still has to float to the top. It just might take longer for that talent to float because there's so much murkiness to rise above, right?
Exactly. And I think that that's always been the case, but I think if you make the pool larger, right, it doesn't, yeah, I have a hard time. Like, I just could never philosophically believe that more people writing and more people reading could ever be a bad thing. And if
Right.
you think about, like, I'm working on a story now that I went to India to report it, and the idea that, like, a magazine piece can be read by everybody in India I talk to instantly is, like, so exciting to me that they're going to be, and 10 years ago that just wouldn't have been the case. So I don't know if we can have it both ways. Like, I don't know if I can sit here and whine about fewer people reading the Times in print, but also not be totally invigorated by being able to send links like that. Like, and I just think that, nostalgia, one of the things that historical research has taught me is that it's really easy to get nostalgic, but when you actually start looking at stuff, you're like, God, the past sucked, like, especially like the Lizzie McGee stuff. I went back and rewrote that chapter because I felt like I had no context for what it meant to be a woman inventor in 1904. And you just start reading about stuff, and this has come up a lot in interviews, like, things were awful. Like, people died really young, and people like had diseases, and like women couldn't vote, and it's just like this idea that things were better then. I'm like, where like, maybe some things were, but like, by and large, I'm really glad to be alive and working now. Like, I have all these tools as a researcher I wouldn't have had, and we just kind of take it for granted. I think that mindset about journalism in particular is just so toxic and so not productive and nuts. Like, it just doesn't get anybody anywhere, and it's like kind of illogical when you think about it.
Yeah. And I wonder, when you're reporting on a longer story or any story, I wonder if there's a part of you that deals with nerves or gets nervous. Is that true for you, or do you just go into a story and you're just, you're a number one ace on the mound, you're not nervous at all, everything's in your wheelhouse?
It depends. I have a lot of friends. I don't think I'm unique in this regard, where you talk about reporter mode, where you get into reporter mode. And one of the things I like about breaking news in particular is you don't have time for existential problems.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you have a deadline and you need to get it done. And I kind of, I think there's certain people, like, the extreme of this, I would argue, are emergency room doctors, where you just don't have time to get anxious. And I feel that way. Like, today's a good example. Like, the rest of the day, I have 5 deadlines I need to juggle and 5 meetings. And, like, I don't have time to brood over stuff or get nervous. And I think that that's something that, especially writing about, like, power and money, you have to psych yourself up before you go in. I'm a big believer in fake it till you make it, too. So if you're intimidated by something or a story, look, we all can have some degree of imposter syndrome too, and the other side of things, but you realize that sometimes in meetings, like, the other person on the other side of the table is doing the exact same thing. So, like, it's kind of like hunting, right? Like, is the bear more scared of you, or are you more scared of the bear? and so I think that's
depends on your weapon, I guess.
That's taught me a lot about this too, to be honest, because, athletes, going to an Olympics, you have to psych yourself up in a way that is, like, a little nuts. Like, it is a little crazy. Like, you have to believe in yourself in a way that's a little, like, illogical, but also will get you, like, to a finish line faster. And so I've always been really interested in the psychology of that. And I think that writers, you have to have that, because part of the job is so crushing. And I remember before the book coming out, you have to tell yourself, like, okay, even if nobody reads this, even if it doesn't hit the bestseller list, because most books don't, even if it doesn't, most books kind of go into this ether. You have to tell yourself, I love the process. I love that I'm putting something out there that wasn't in the world before, that needed to be, that it's telling a story that I believe in. And, like, Melville died thinking he wrote an okay book about whales. Like, and even if you're not writing Moby Dick, it doesn't have to be Moby Dick. You have to, like, really, like, detach yourself in a way that is, I don't even know if I'm doing a good job describing it. And I think that every piece, however long or short it is, the stakes for that get higher, and you have to, like, be a little bit more workmanlike about it. And I think that that's like I was talking to my brother about this, like, kind of like factory-like work ethic, like, that with books, like, you are making widgets, and you do get attached to the widget, but you also have to put it out there at some point. And there's no shortage of examples of people who write stuff and it goes out and nobody notices it or cares or appreciates it, or it sucks and you do deserve to get ripped apart for it or what have you. So and I have no idea. I mean, I can't, like, I've written stuff that I felt really excited about, and I really felt like the world was going to eat up, and it falls flat. And I've had stuff I've written that I thought was crap that goes out there and people think it's the best. And I don't know what the dividing line between the two is. I wish I knew. So it's, yeah. So and that's what I mean by this, like the second book. Like, I feel like I'm so much more into the process of this one, and really loving the puzzle of figuring out how to do it and the challenge of having to do it rather than seeing it as a problem. And that's, again, to game design, right? The challenge mindset, right? That's, if you're the hero of your own movie, you approach these things like a superhero, knocking down villains rather than in existential despair, laying on your floor in the fetal position. So I think that attitude can really, it's something I've had to learn over the years and still am working on. But so no, I don't, that's a very long-winded way of saying, no, I don't really get psyched out the way I think I used to.
Yeah, I think you may make a good point. And I think the only way to maintain a certain level of optimism, especially among journalists who are kind of really, if you hang around them too long, everyone starts lamenting the whole industry, and it can just really bog you down. I think as long as you're process driven and not results driven, it definitely, if you love the work and do the work, that's where you're going to find the greatest fulfillment. Everything else, like you said, is out of your control, and then that's how you sort of stay sane in this sort of climate we're in. I guess it's how I deal with it for sure.
Right, but also, to go back to the whole factory idea, like, you do want to make good widgets, right?
Course,
like, and that's something. So I'm a huge David Bowie fan, and I was thinking about his death and a lot. And if you listen to Black Star, that album, so I listened to it the day it came out before he died because I'm a Bowie fan, and then I re-listened to it, of course, after he died. And there's there's so many things. Bowie's a separate podcast, but like, I do think that if you look at his work, his career, I do think there is, this message of like, you need to do it, like he, I think if you watch that last video, it's incredible because it's this album, and honestly, I now have a hard time listening to it because it's so emotionally intense. Like this idea of a guy who knows he's dying, he's an intensely creative person, and he's doing this last act for his fans, for the world. And there is this idea in there, I think, of don't wait to do what you want to do. Like, if you want to make an album, if you want to write a book, if you want to do you can't keep waiting to do the kind of stuff that you want to do. You have to just start doing it. And have conviction in doing it. And I think that's something that music has taught me a lot of, and that, it's so funny because I was just thinking about that in the last few weeks, this idea of the urgency of a creative impulse. And I think journalists sometimes get, sidelined and aren't as in tune with that as other, artists traditionally have been.
Yeah, it's funny how David Bowie brought you to that spot, and it's of just, your time is limited. If you just do it. If you're gonna do what you want to do it. And kind of what brought me to that very recently, just that mindset, was this whole these two black holes that collided 1.3 billion years ago. And then, do you hear about this?
Yeah.
Yeah, and this whole gravitational wave that finally hit Earth, traveling at the speed of light, took 1.3 billion years to reach us. And the mere how impossibly insignificant that made me feel. And then at the same point, I was just like, why fear anything? We're all just these tiny little molecules. What is holding you back? The place is so big. It's just why not just live a life with no fear? Because it is just so vast, and everything here is so small. Why not just put it all out there? You want to write that book, write it. You want to make that album, make it. Don't hold these black holes collided 1.3 billion years ago. The place is just way too big. We are this tiny. Why live in fear? Why not just do what you want to do? It's just that kind of snapped me awake. It kind of awakened me in a weird way. I don't know if that makes any sense to you, but it kind of does to me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And some of that's personal experience too, because whether a death is close to you or something far away, and it's such a cliche, but I think there is a lot of truth to that. That like if you're close to that, it does make you kind of think about like your mortality.
Yeah.
And I recently got in an argument with somebody about luck, and I realized recently I don't know if I believe in luck. I don't. I believe like in especially in news, something happening. It's that whole idea of being ready for it to happen or working hard for it, and I think that particularly women have this idea of like, I just got lucky in my career. It's like, no, you work your butt off and you do like, so being able to do the stuff you want to do, that's kind of a fight. And so I used to say, oh, I'm so lucky I get to do what I love. And then I'm like, no, like I can't not do what I love. Like I can't do like, listicles of whatever, or like, or at least I couldn't do that full time. Like and that's not luck. That's like a choice. And and I think that our profession is very much filled with trade-offs. Like you do forego more money to do a certain type of story, and but like there's a happiness price in there too.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think that's something that, especially when people kind of ask about freelance versus staff versus whatever. And one of the things I find so liberating about it being a freelancer is you get to say yes or no to projects, and you get to have an idea and then find a home for it, and you're the one driving it the whole way. And you do have to have kind of this nutty faith in the idea or project to say like, no, it's going to happen with or without you as an editor, or with or without you as a publication, or what have you. And the pre-story is a great example. Like I, years ago didn't know when or how to do it. And then it just ended up perfectly finding a home at Grantland. But I had no idea like 4 or 5 years ago that I was even like, oh, you're going to do a Spoon River thing for an ESPN affiliate. Like I just was like, what? Like, so you don't have to know the ending, I guess. And I feel like journalism, we're good at that in our work sometimes, but we're not good at that when it comes to like our own careers or understanding or how we're going to put it all together.
So how do you deal with self-doubt when you're in the throes of a project?
Oh, what a great question. Self-doubt in the throes of a creative project. It sounds lame. I guess I pushed through it. And I think that that's why running, right? I mean, everybody's different. And for me, when I'm having a bout of self-doubt, it's kind of like a step away for a minute and go do something that pulls your head out. Mm-hmm. And running does that. I think it kind of recreates particularly being in the woods or nature or things that I was used to as a kid that I find quite peaceful. And I think that it takes a long time. And I don't think this is unique to writing. I think because self-doubt is also a form of like anxiety, in some cases even anger. So I think that knowing you're getting to this fundamental core of how do you deal with that, in anything. And so for me, like I go for a run, or I will pick up a book off my shelf that, from an author that really, some of the names we were talking about earlier, that kind of pulls me away and re-inspires me or unite something. I actually just a few weeks ago painted something and drew something, and I was like, that's what I love about drawing, and I'm somebody who's a terrible artist, but like it does make you think about, you're forced to confront something like, oh, the shape of this or how it looks, so I think pulling yourself out a little bit, playing with Legos with a kid, like those kind of things can actually be really clarifying, because you kind of step back to what you were working on, a different person, and that isn't doubting yourself. So yeah, I think it is kind of your body or your brain's way of saying you need to like take a rest for a second. Yeah. Yeah,
it's the doodling there. I saw Austin Kleon, who's the...
Oh yeah, he's awesome.
Yeah, he's great. I've read all his stuff, and I saw him in Brooklyn when he was promoting his Steal Like an Artist journal, and he did this talk about notebooks from famous people, and I'm blanking on the artist, but I believe she was a writer, but she always kept a blank legal pad next to her, and whenever she would get stuck with her writing, she would just start doodling, and on the legal pad to her right, and it was just a way to like sort of like you lacing up your shoes and going out for a run, like that was her way of like detaching but still staying engaged. And it's one of those neat little tricks that we as artists can sort of take ourselves out of something in order to better plug back into it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And like it goes back to what you're saying. One of the things I like about journalism, and I'm one of those writers that has to have deadlines, like is you don't have time for self-doubt if you need to get something to somebody by 4. Like you have to like. And I'm a morning person. I'm not a procrastinator. I get anxious when I procrastinate. And so that's something that I take comfort in actually spending time in something. So if I think writing sucks, like I like being able to work on it and then say, I'm going to sleep on it and then come back to it. And procrastinating, you don't get to do that because you just don't have that kind of time. So yeah, I kind of tend to dig in my heels in a little bit when I get nervous.
Do you meditate at all?
Yeah, so it's so funny. I do a lot of yoga, which obviously incorporates that. And I'm like not a natural athlete. And one of the things I like about yoga is like you don't have to be, and it does force you to like slow the hell down. So I have found that super, super helpful. Also helps prevent injuries in running. So like that side. But I find it hugely, hugely helpful. Absolutely. Because you don't realize how full of crap your brain is until you kind of try to empty it out. So
yeah. Like you have to defrag the computer so it can run efficiently.
Right.
Run efficiently, I'm sorry.
In any sports physio would tell you have to rest an injury. And we don't do that with our heads. Like we don't do that at all and I think that's I think running is extremely meditative, for me at least, because it does that too. And there is a repetition to it. And yeah, for sure.
So what does the first 60 to 90 minutes of your day look like?
60, 90 minutes. Okay. Morning rituals I'm like fascinated with.
Yeah, me too.
So coffee happens instantly. Like it just has to happen. It's like not negotiable. If I travel, I bring coffee with me. Like it's a thing.
How do you prepare it?
When I'm at home, dripper French press with milk, no sugar. When I'm on the road, obviously you have to compromise a little bit. So if there's no milk, that's fine. I survive. And I try to, in the first 30 minutes of the day, not answer any emails. And I try to write 500 words of anything. Anything. That could be what I did the day before. It could be an idea I had. It could be a nightmare. It could be anything. And then one of two things happens, kind of depending on my schedule. I either kind of dive into work stuff, because those are my best hours, or I go for a run. For me, the day is won or lost by 10 a.m. So, but having that first kind of 20 to 30 minutes in my own head really helps, and really kind of helps me set up my, like, and I'm a big list maker. So every morning I make a list of like the stuff I have to do. So that's everything from appointments to meetings to calls to like, and I kind of frame it as like a good day would be getting X done, like 80% of this, an awesome day would be getting 100% of it. But if I don't have that list in that first hour, then I feel like I'm floundering all day. Yeah.
Do you journal at all? Do like any kind of morning pages?
Yes, I have kept a journal since I was like a teenager. I mean, younger, a kid. And I wrote something for The Guardian about it. And yeah, it's hugely helpful. I kind of see it almost like as a warm up. It's like kind of like the equivalent of like stretching before you go work out or something.
Yeah.
And it's nice when you're paid to write and it's what you love to do. It's nice to know that you still have part of your day that's just it's not for anybody. It's just not for anybody. It's for nobody but you to kind of like clear your throat and, sort out your head. So yeah, I'm a big believer in journaling.
Do you have a favorite documentary?
Oh my gosh, I watch so many documentaries. I'm a huge doc fiend.
My friend Maggie Messett, who was on the podcast before, she's a big documentary person also, and she's an author and does magazine pieces. But her big thing is like the writing is like putting documentaries on paper.
Yeah,
and so I wonder like what your favorite documentaries are, since you're a big doc person.
Oh gosh,
if you could name 2 or 3.
I thought The Jinx was fabulous, which I know is recent. Oh man, God, this is such an overwhelming question.
The ESPN 30 for 30 ones are great because they're like they're like magazine pieces.
Right, absolutely. And I have to go in a couple of minutes. I'm so sorry, but I'm trying to think of an answer for this. Best documentaries. Oh man, there's so many. Like I said, I love The Jinx. Secret Lives is a film by Aviva Slesson, which was on HBO. I know Aviva. She was a professor of mine at NYU. She's fabulous. But it's about, again, it's this idea of contemporary history. So it's about hidden children during the Holocaust. And she kind of she was one herself, and she kind of finds them today. and figures out, what they're up to and what they're doing, kind of how that experience as a child shaped the rest of their life, which I thought was really fascinating. That's kind of, I don't know why that popped in my head. I'm a sucker for crime documentaries.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I have a great answer to this, actually. The Agony and Ecstasy of Phil Spector is this fabulous documentary that not enough people saw. It was at the Film Forum here for a while, and it's about Phil Spector, and it's one of the last interviews I think he did before he went to prison, and it walks you through the trial and how complicated it is, but also him talking about his role in the music industry. So you're hearing these iconic songs and him being kind of nutty and crazy and talking about it, but you're also getting walked through this crime story. I thought it was brilliant. It's one of my favorite movies the last 10 years, documentary or not. So that's my choice.
Cool.
There we go.
Two more quick things.
Sure.
Will you, or are you open to a part 2 interview? Because I do want to let you go so you don't miss your next appointment.
Perhaps, but it would have to be in a month or two because I'm going to be jet setting again. But yes, sure.
Cool. No, that's fine because I still have some other things I think would be cool to talk about, and that would fill up another half hour, 45 minutes or so of fun stuff. And also, where can people find you online?
Mary Pilon, Pilon.com.
Mary Pilon. I think I've been calling you Pilon or Pilon.
It makes no sense, so it's totally cool if people get it.
Very nice. Well, Mary, thank you so much for carving out some time in your morning. Keep doing your good work, and the Monopolist is excellent, and I can't wait to read what you've got coming down the pipeline next. So thanks again, and safe travels, and we'll talk soon.
Fabulous. Thanks so much.
You got it. Take care.
Take care. Bye.